Mercedes may be quietly pushing to eliminate Ferrari's most dangerous technical weapon, the so-called Macarena wing, after reports claim it delivered as much as 0.6 of a second on the straights. Ferrari reportedly revealed the design for only 5 laps in Bahrain, brought it back in China, and immediately triggered concern inside Mercedes. But here is the shocking twist. The FIA reportedly approved Ferrari's wing, while Mercedes was being investigated over its own front wing movement and power unit questions. That means this is no longer just a fight over legality. It may be a battle to protect straight line speed, preserve a championship advantage, and stop Ferrari before the gap closes completely. And the real reason Mercedes wants this wing gone may have far more to do with fear than fairness. Subscribe to the channel. To understand why Mercedes would care so much about Ferrari's Macarena wing, you have to start with one simple fact. Straight line speed changes everything. A car that is faster on the straights does not only gain time, it attacks differently, it defends differently, it forces rivals to use more aggressive setups, and it can make a car that looked vulnerable one weekend suddenly become dangerous the next. That is why the reported 0.6 of a second matters. 0.6 may not sound enormous outside Formula One. Inside Formula One, it can be the difference between controlling a race and spending the entire afternoon trapped behind another car. And according to the source, Ferrari's rotating rear wing concept may have created exactly that kind of advantage. The design reportedly appeared for only 5 laps during pre-season testing in Bahrain. 5 laps. That is all. But sometimes 5 laps are enough to make every rival engineer stop what they are doing. Because teams do not need a full race to recognize danger. They look at speed traces. They compare acceleration. They study where a car begins pulling away. They ask whether the gain comes from power, drag reduction, setup, or something hidden inside the aerodynamic package. And if the answer is unclear, suspicion grows immediately. That appears to be what happened here. Ferrari briefly showed the design. Then the car disappeared from view. The wing returned later in China. And by then, the paddock was already watching. The source says Mercedes informally approached the FIA after GPS data reportedly showed Ferrari gaining as much as 0.6 of a second on the straights. That is not a small concern. That is a direct threat. Mercedes entered the season with strength in high-speed cornering stability. Ferrari's supposed advantage attacks somewhere else. Raw speed, efficiency, the ability to cut resistance when the car was traveling flat out. Think of 2 runners. One is stronger through the turns. The other suddenly discovers how to remove weight every time the road becomes straight. The first runner may still look balanced, but every long section becomes a problem. That is a position Mercedes may have feared, because a rear wing normally creates a compromise. More angle can generate more grip. More grip helps in corners. But more angle also creates more drag. Drag slows the car on the straights. Teams spend enormous time trying to balance those 2 forces, grip and speed, downforce and resistance. The Macarena wing reportedly tried to solve both. According to the source, the rotating element could move through roughly 180 degrees, using air pressure rather than heavy hydraulic systems. That means the wing may have been designed to react by itself. No driver pressing a secret button. No heavy mechanism moving inside the car. The air itself becomes part of the system. At high speed, the pressure changes the wing's behavior. The element rotates. Resistance drops. The car accelerates more freely. Then, when the conditions change, the wing returns to a more useful shape for cornering. That is why the nickname makes sense. The element appears to dance. Not randomly, not for show, for performance. And if that description is accurate, Mercedes had every reason to worry. Because a self-actuating wing could offer Ferrari a huge advantage without the usual weight and complexity. The car gains speed. The system remains relatively simple, and the driver receives a benefit every lap. But here is where the story becomes much more complicated. The FIA reportedly approved Ferrari's design. That changes the entire argument. Mercedes could no longer say only that the wing looked suspicious. The governing body had examined it. The technical director, Nicholas Tombatsis, reportedly approved its legality in Maranello during the first days of April. That means Ferrari had the strongest possible defense. The wing passed. The FIA accepted it, and the design could return. For Mercedes, that decision would be difficult to ignore, because once the FIA approves a rival innovation, the competitive response becomes much harder. Mercedes can copy it. Mercedes can challenge the interpretation. Or Mercedes can push for the rules to change. Those are the realistic options. And copying is not always easy. A wing like this may not work as a simple bolt-on part. It may depend on the car's entire aerodynamic philosophy. The airflow arriving from the front, the balance of the floor, the way the rear of the car reacts, the power unit's delivery, the suspension, the ride height, everything may be connected. That means Mercedes could not simply draw the same shape and expect the same result. It might need weeks, possibly months, and during that time, Ferrari could continue developing. That is where technical concern becomes political pressure. If Mercedes believes the design is legal but too powerful, the fastest route may not be imitation. It may be restriction. That does not automatically mean Mercedes is acting unfairly. Every Formula One team challenges a rival advantage when it sees one. Red Bull would do the same. McLaren would do the same. Ferrari would do the same. The language is always about legality. The motivation is always about performance. And sometimes both are true. Mercedes may have genuinely believed the wing crossed the intention of the rules. It may also have known that removing the wing would protect its own straight-line weakness. Those two ideas can exist together. That is what makes this story so fascinating. It is not simply good against bad. It is not Ferrari inventing and Mercedes complaining. It is two elite teams fighting over where innovation ends and exploitation begins. And then came the twist. While Mercedes questioned Ferrari's rear wing, Mercedes' own car came under investigation. Rivals reportedly noticed unusual timing in the front wing flap movement on the W17. The rules require the moving elements to complete their cycle within 400 milliseconds. But rival measurements reportedly suggested the Mercedes system was taking closer to 800 milliseconds, twice the limit. That raised a serious question. Was Mercedes using a movable aerodynamic device in a way the regulations did not allow? Suddenly, the team questioning Ferrari had to defend itself, and this is where the political balance changed. Mercedes could argue that Ferrari's rear wing was an illegal trick. Ferrari could point toward Mercedes' front wing. Mercedes could question Ferrari's straight-line gain. Rivals could question Mercedes' flap timing. The entire battle became less about one suspicious part and more about the new regulations themselves. Were the rules too open? Were the tests too simple? Were several teams finding completely different ways to exploit the same gaps? That is what McLaren's chief designer appeared to suggest. Rob Marshall reportedly said the rules look highly prescriptive at first, almost as if the legality box drew the car for the teams. Then the season began. Ferrari appeared with an unusual rear wing. Mercedes used a distinctive front wing system. Different teams found different shapes, and the regulations suddenly looked far less restrictive than everyone expected. That matters, because when the rules leave more room than engineers expected, the first team to understand that freedom gains a huge advantage. Ferrari may have understood it at the rear of the car. Mercedes may have understood it at the front, and the FIA was forced to judge both. The Mercedes investigation reportedly ended without disciplinary action. The team explained that the slower front wing flap movement came from insufficient hydraulic pressure at high speed, not deliberate programming. The FIA accepted that explanation. Mercedes was cleared. Ferrari's wing was also approved. Both teams survived. But the conflict did not disappear. It became more dangerous, because now each side could claim legitimacy. Ferrari could say its wing was legal. Mercedes could say its front wing behavior was not intentional, and the FIA had approved both. That sounds like the end of the story. It was not, because legality does not remove competitive fear. Mercedes still faced the same straight line problem. Ferrari still had a design that reportedly reduced drag in a highly effective way, and the championship pressure continued growing. That is where the timing becomes important. Ferrari's wing returned ahead of Miami after additional testing at Monza. The car became more competitive. The gap began narrowing, and the Macarena wing moved from technical curiosity to championship weapon. That changes the way Mercedes would view it. Early in the season, the design may have looked experimental. Later, it may have looked essential. And once a rival innovation begins producing results, patience disappears. Mercedes could no longer treat the wing as something strange. It had to treat it as something dangerous. Because Formula One teams do not fear ideas. They fear repeatable performance. One fast straight can be set up. One good race can be circumstance. But if the same advantage appears again and again, the threat becomes real. That is when teams begin pushing harder. More questions, more data, more pressure on the FIA, more discussion about whether the tests reflect what the car does at speed. And that is why Mercedes' campaign may have remained quiet. A public attack will make the team look defensive. A private technical challenge sounds responsible. A public accusation creates headlines. A quiet question to the FIA creates action. That is how Formula One politics usually works. Not with dramatic meetings in front of cameras, with technical documents, private conversations, measurements, and carefully chosen language. Mercedes would not need to say, ban Ferrari's wing because we are afraid. It only needed to ask whether the wing behaved as the regulations intended. That sounds neutral, but the consequences would not be neutral. If the FIA changed the test, Ferrari could lose performance. If Ferrari lost performance, Mercedes could protect its advantage. And if the championship gap was already shrinking, that technical decision could become one of the most important moments of the season. That is why the real motivation may be deeper than legality. Mercedes may not be trying to prove Ferrari cheated. Mercedes may be trying to make sure Ferrari cannot continue using the one idea that attacks Mercedes where it is most vulnerable. Straight line speed. That is the first major pressure point. Not the nickname, not the rotation, not even the 6/10ths. The fact that Ferrari found a way to turn Mercedes' weakness into a repeated threat. And once that happened, the Macarena wing stopped being only a clever design. It became a championship problem. And this is where the fight stops being about one wing and becomes a battle over who controls the meaning of the rules. Ferrari had already achieved something Mercedes could not easily ignore. The wing had reportedly been inspected. It had been questioned. It had been discussed across the paddock. And according to the source, the FIA still approved it. That should have ended the argument. But in Formula One, approval does not always end a technical war. Sometimes it only changes the battlefield. Mercedes could no longer focus only on whether Ferrari's wing passed the existing test. The stronger argument became whether the existing test was good enough. That is a much more dangerous question, because if the test itself is incomplete, Ferrari can be fully legal today, then force a change tomorrow. No admission of cheating.